Now, Lynne, how significant is this latest ban targeting women in Afghanistan?
Hi, Yvonne. The Taliban have been back in power for 16 months, and from day one, they began targeting women. And if we think back to the last time they were in control of Afghanistan, from 1996 to 2001, there is no difference here. Really, the pearl-clutching disingenuous shock at the latest pronouncement that women will not be allowed to go to university or to work for international charities is really just that. The parameters within which women can live and function have been shrinking for a long time, and anyone who was surprised by these latest pronouncements really just hasn't been paying attention.
Well, there have been protests in support of those female students who have been banned from universities. Just how serious are the concerns that there'll be further bans by the Taliban by the community in Afghanistan?
Oh, I think that the space within which women can function and live is shrinking and can really only get worse. The Taliban have made it very clear that this is their policy and their approach, but the revisionism that we've seen since they took over makes it sound like shock horror. Isn't Afghanistan suddenly an awful place for a woman? Afghanistan during the Republic years was also regularly one of the worst places in the world to be born female. And so anyone who thinks that women in Afghanistan were until August 2021 living the same way you and I do has really just been delusional. I really think that things are only going to get worse. The demonstrations and protests that we've seen from women are becoming fewer and fewer. And the Taliban are staying in power and maintaining their writ through violence. That's the only power that they have. There's no rule of law, and that's how they make people obey.
And returning to the ban that the latest ban that the Taliban have imposed, aid agencies are now waiting to find out more before they can resume normal operations. But presumably this needs to be sorted pretty urgently as people continue to need aid.
Yes, people will continue to need aid for some time to come. Tens of millions of people, estimates of up to half the population, which is 40 million, are hungry. We already know that people have been selling their children and their body parts to get money to buy food. But that was also the case under the Republic. Most of the people who work for these international organisations would be men anyway. Women have always been in the minority of people employed across all sectors. I think that what we're going to see is more appeals for more money. The UN has just recently put its hand out for another $4.5 billion US. People are hungry, and even though millions of dollars are going into Afghanistan, people are still hungry.
Well, internationally, foreign ministers, including Australia's Penny Wong, have condemned this latest move by the Taliban, as they see as another backward step for the country's rulers.
Well, yeah, but, you know, girls haven't been able to go to secondary school since the Taliban took over. How were they expected to go on to university? Really, I don't see why all of a sudden there should be an outpouring of outrage at the way the Taliban are treating people. I think what we should be asking is, what does the treatment of women mask? Women aren't the only people in the country who are subject to extreme violence and prejudice. There are other ethnicities, for instance, Hazaras, who are also Shia, who are being regularly abused. There's a whole range of outrages that really we could have been voicing discontent about for a long time, but there haven't been any consequences. The United States sends $40 million US a week in cash into Afghanistan that then goes to the Taliban to be distributed. And the Taliban are siphoning off large quantities of that. They, like every group in power, have a constituency that they have to keep happy, and that's what they're doing. They're also expanding drugs production. I think they're probably selling those dollars onto the market to help the Russian cash crunch and the Iranian cash crunch next door. Really, what we're doing is masking the reality of what it's like for all Afghan people and the consequences of sending enormous amounts of money to what is essentially a group run by terrorists, and where it's going and what it's funding: drug trafficking, people trafficking, war in Ukraine, propping up the regime next door in Iran. These questions are being masked by our pearl-clutching outrage about what we should have known was coming anyway: the treatment of women.
Lynne O'Donnell, always great to get your analysis. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Yvonne.